Hey guys. So now that you've wrapped up part two, or hopefully are wrapping it up soon, I wanted to make another similar video for part three and just walk you through what's expected. Um, so I'm gonna share my screen again and go back to that document that has all the guidelines. Again, that's under files in the syllabus folder in Canvas. You can also find it, I think, linked in all of the assignment pages on Canvas for the grant proposal pieces. Okay, so hopefully you are seeing on the video a copy of the proposal assignment details, and I've scrolled down to part three here. So this is really, in a lot of ways, the heart of your proposal and the heart of this class because it gets into the research methods. And that's the first part. You're going to dive right into that. And that's going to take up the bulk of part three. The rest of these items, numbers 2 through 4, are each going to be like just about 1 or 2 paragraphs. Not very much, just a couple of things that you need to hit on and address, but that you don't need to dwell on. The methods, on the other hand, need to be described in detail. They need to be, it needs to be really clear why they're appropriate for answering the question that you've asked. And so for that reason, you're actually going to restate your research questions again. And in the beginning, you may have just given kind of one overall research question, but it might require that you find out a couple of different things and engage in a couple of different tasks. So here you can restate your research question exactly as you did earlier in the proposal, or you can choose to break it down and try to make it more specific. I encourage you to think about the class we had on operationalization when you get to restating your research questions here. This is where you want it to be really clear by the way that you've phrased your research questions, exactly what it is you're going to do, what it is you're going to measure, and how you're going to measure it. So earlier in the grant proposal, when we stated a research question in that first opening paragraph or two, that's where we were really trying to hook the reader in and show them that we had a really important question and that it was framed around important issues. But here, this is where we're really saying very precisely, what is it that we're going to measure? Who is going to be involved? And how are we going to get it done? That's also going to help you think through what methods you want to use. So in this class, and this is unfortunately the part of the class that you're doing more independently, we cover several specific methods. Surveys, interviews, focus groups, those are just a few of them. I think I also have a module on photo voice, which is a really interesting method that I think a lot of you might like. And I recommend that you explore the information in that module and think about how it might apply to your project. And I will be providing some additional information, some videos about those specific methods to help you kind of get a feel for what's the most important thing to take away so that you don't end up reading PowerPoints that are 30 slides long without any context. So think about the methods that you would use for your project. And this is where you have to write it out. And you're going to have to go into a little bit more detail than just saying, well, I'm going to do a survey and ask students how finances impact their mental health. Right? That's not going to provide us with enough information to know that you really have a good concept of how you're going to get this survey done. So instead, you would want to explain the population of people you're going to survey. So how many surveys do you need to administer, do you think, to get good data? Is it going to be delivered online? Or is it going to be something that people do in the mail? Or are you going to call people up on the telephone and ask them the questions, walk them through the survey, and record the answers for them? You also would have to explain how you're going to analyze the data that you get from whatever instrument you choose to use. So suppose you're not going to do a survey, you're going to do interviews. Maybe you're going to interview people interview people in the administration at the university who were involved in making some of these decisions about public-private partnerships. Maybe you want to understand how the budget is done at UK. There's only so much you can understand just from looking at the numbers they publish, and you want to get more in-depth information. That's a great way to use an interview. But again, you're going to need to write out who specifically are you going to interview. Is it going to be students? Is it going to be administrators? Is it going to be faculty? Is it going to be all of the above? How many interviews are you going to do? And remember, be realistic. Interviews take a lot of energy, a lot of time, and it's a lot of work to interpret them. And just to give you a little sneak preview about the methods, if you haven't gotten into it yet, that's where the trade-off between something like doing an interview or doing a survey comes in. With a survey, you can get a lot of data because typically you can analyze that in an automated way using computer software. But for an interview, you really have to read through and think deeply about all the information that the person's giving you in the context of this structured conversation, which is really all an interview is. It's a structured conversation. So I think those are the main things that you want to hit in those couple of paragraphs, that you have a good concept of what you're going to do, how it links back specifically to your research question. That again is stated in a well operationalized way, so we know exactly what you're getting at. Yeah, I guess just contact me if you have questions as you're writing that up. I think that might be one of the more tricky parts of this assignment. And it's really too bad we didn't get to have the second half of the class where we would have really done a deep dive into the methods. Okay, so the next piece of this is going to be your community engagement strategy. What do I mean by that? What I'm really asking you for here is to think about how you're going to make sure that whatever method you use is going to be accessible to people, and how are you going to make this research inclusive and not just a matter of, there's a history in academia and in the world of nonprofits actually, where people just drop into communities and do research and they gather a lot of information and then they take it and they analyze it and they publish it and they put their name on it and they use it to get promotions and they use it to get grants for other work that they're doing, and they don't actually involve anybody in the community in the process. So if you think back to the very beginning of the term when we watched those short films, we watched a little mini documentary called Participate. And remember, the main theme of that was this problem of research happening, programs being designed, where the people most affected were never even really involved. So this is your chance to tell us, okay, how are you going to get people involved in this research process? Are you going to have people come to a stakeholder meeting before, during, or after the research is done to help you interpret the data? To help you, or to even just share back the data with them so that they can do something with it? Are you going to publish a highly accessible, readable bulletin or brochure or report that people can have so that they understand what you've done? In other words, how can you get people involved in a way that's going to help them make change? Another thing to consider here is how you're going to make it accessible. So if you're going to do your survey online and your issue is housing justice, what about all the people right now who don't have access to internet? That's one of the big issues with us trying to do this course online. There were huge storms in Eastern Kentucky, and some people are going to be without power possibly for 1 to 2 weeks. And so I wonder now, how are people going to access their coursework, and how is the university going to be able to help them? Those same issues apply when you're doing research. you need to make it accessible, not only because it's the right thing to do, but also because it's going to affect your data, right? You are going to be missing a huge picture of housing justice issues if you don't include people who can easily access your survey on the internet, right? So just make sure that you address those kinds of issues. If you're going to have a community meeting, how are you going to make sure that you have those meetings at times that working people can make it, including people who work the night shift, right? How are you going to make sure that you find a time that works for people? Are you going to offer childcare? That's something you can ask for money for in your budget for your grant proposal. Um, um, yeah. So I think I've kind of hit on those main issues there. So it's just 1 to 2 paragraphs about who's going to be involved and how. Actually, one last thing, you do need to make sure you touch on diversity and inclusiveness. Again, that's especially important for campus housing. How are you going to make sure that people who have English as a second language, who are maybe international students, are going to be able to participate to a full extent? How are you going to make sure even that you have that your sample is representative at the end of the day of the full student body? If you're going to use a method and you decide, well, I'm going to have everyone who lives in my dorm involved in the research process. But if your dorm is part of an LLP, or if your dorm is predominantly freshmen, you're going to be missing a big piece of the population, and your research is going to be flawed. Okay, so the next piece is going to be your theory of change. And this is really short and sweet, but it can be a tricky one. This is where you think about that big picture issue. What are the outcomes that you hope this research is going to generate? And how does your research design and methodology fit in with those big picture outcomes, right? So how do you believe that doing some kind of community-based or participatory research on this issue is going to have an impact? And one of the reasons that we include this is that most funders have their own theory of change already. So you could go to a couple of different foundation websites, and you could look at their mission. They usually will have a page that say what they do and don't fund. Sometimes it may be labeled directly theory of change, and sometimes you just kind of have to figure it out on your own by looking through their materials. But usually they'll say pretty explicitly, like, some groups will only fund social movements. Some organizations will only fund direct services like after school programs. And some foundations will not fund any direct services, right? So you have to look and see what are they focused on, and how do you make sure that you are developing a research proposal that fits. And again, you don't actually have a specific funder in mind for this project. That's just to help you kind of imagine and think about it. Because later on, if you do have to write grant proposals, that'll be something that you have to think about and do. Okay, and then lastly is the leadership development plan. And this is sort of similar to the community engagement strategy, but it goes a little bit further to say, how does this live on after you go away? So the research is going to come to an end, the money's going to run out. Well, getting back to that theory of change, it's not going to make much impact if everything just stops once your little grant runs out or your research project ends. So, if you're having community meetings, how are you going to give people the opportunity to facilitate? How are you going to give people the opportunity to do interpretation of the results and to maybe research some of this stuff themselves? Are you going to train people to check the budget and to keep up with the budget that UK publishes every year that we looked at in class that made us go, wow, you know, there's been huge public disinvestment in higher education in Kentucky. And we've seen the burden on students and tuition rising really go up in the past decade. That was really powerful for us to look at. It was really powerful for us to learn, for students in our class to learn about zoning meetings and to go and see what that process was like. So how are you going to in turn use this research opportunity to give people that kind of experience where once the project's over, they know how to keep up with what is the state legislature doing with respect to appropriations? What is the governor saying about funding higher education? And so it doesn't necessarily have to be policy oriented. I'm just trying to give you some ideas about how to think about this section. So I hope that this has been helpful. And I'm realizing there historically was a separate budget assignment that I had previously said we're not going to have any more small assignments. Normally, you would include at the end of any grant proposal a budget where you actually have to go and think through, okay, this is what I'm asking this foundation for. Here are all the specific line items. I think we can skip that for this semester and just let it be the written piece, because we're not going to have a good chance to workshop that in class. And I know that you guys all have a lot on your plates as it is. But if you want to get some skills at developing budgets, I'm happy to work with anybody who wants to learn what that process is like. Okay, well, I think this video has already been a little longer than it needed to be, so I'm going to shut up. But thank you for everything you guys are doing. Bye.